Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, June 4th, 2021. Why do they still defend the income payroll tax system? Each week there are many blogs that detail some of the many frauds perpetrated against the income payroll tax system. This week's tax fraud blotter provides these examples. International fugitive Anton Bogdanov, a Russian citizen, has been sentenced to 5 years in prison for wire fraud conspiracy and computer intrusions in connection with a scheme in which he and others hacked into tax preparation firms, stole personal information, used that information to file federal tax returns in the names of some of the firm's clients, and fraudulently tried to obtain more than $1.5 million in refunds that the IRS just robotically sends out to prepaid debit cards. From New York, Swiss Life Holding, Swiss Life Liechtenstein, Swiss Life Singapore, and Swiss Life Luxembourg have all entered into a deferred prosecution agreement for criminal misconduct and agreed to pay more than $77 million in connection with an offshore insurance scheme. The Swiss Life entities were charged with conspiring with U.S. taxpayers and others to conceal more than $1.452 billion in offshore insurance policies from the IRS. The Swiss Life entities were engaged in parking funds in a Swiss Life policy until the clock ran out on the perceived statute of limitations for tax offenses. From Albany, Georgia, between 2012 and 2017, Candace Roberts worked as a preparer and manager at Rogers Tax Service. Over 5 years, she inflated clients' refunds by fraudulently claiming American Opportunity credits, education credits, and business income. In all, Roberts defrauded the IRS out of more than $700,000. From Dix Hill, New York, accountant James G. Gura has been sentenced to 3 years of probation, the first 2 months of which must be spent in home confinement, for a felony tax offense. Gura worked as an accountant for Bruno DeFabio, an owner of several pizza restaurants in Connecticut and New York. DeFabio and his businesses engaged in a practice whereby cash was removed from the cash registers but not deposited into the restaurant's operating bank accounts. Gura knew that DeFabio had a practice of paying his employees in cash, and he also knew that DeFabio was not properly withholding taxes from his employees' wages and remitting that money to the IRS. Still, Gura routinely reviewed and approved DeFabio's quarterly returns. DeFabio, Stephen Siafi, a partner in some of DeFabio's restaurants, and bookkeeper Adelicia Lopez Santos all previously pleaded guilty and have been sentenced. From Norwalk, Connecticut, financial executive Robert T. Colgan has pleaded guilty to a federal tax offense. Colgan controlled a business known as Colgan Financial Group and employed a bookkeeper and a tax preparer to assist in preparing both the company's corporate returns and his personal income tax returns. Colgan used business funds to pay personal expenses, but directed his bookkeeper to record those payments as a loan in the company's books. Colgan's personal income tax returns for 2013 through 2017 tax years underreported his income and resulted in a tax loss to the IRS of more than $250,000. He pleaded guilty to one count of filing a false tax return, which carries a maximum sentence of 3 years in prison. From Wichita, Kansas, tax preparer Sonia Hernandez-Smith, a.k.a. Sonia Raquel Vasquez, has been sentenced to 18 months in prison for defrauding the IRS out of more than $100,000, according to reports. She reportedly admitted that she prepared income tax returns that claimed credits for children, even though her clients were ineligible for those credits. And finally, from New Bern, North Carolina, tax preparer Priscilla Evans of Rocky Mount, North Carolina, has been sentenced to 2 years in prison in order to pay $229,000 in restitution for conspiring to prepare and file false returns. Evans conspired to file fraudulent returns for the 2011 through 2016 tax years for clients of the Community Tax Services. Evans and her co-conspirators generated fraudulent refunds for their clients by falsely claiming education credits and other illegitimate items. The IRS says the fraud resulted in the loss of more than $2 million. Now, the list of abuses and fraud just goes on and on and on. But the sad fact is that only a small fraction of those who are cheating the system actually get caught. Now, for years, the government tried to hide just how bad the problem is. But just recently, the IRS commissioner finally admitted that fraud and evasion cost the IRS close to $1 trillion a year. So why keep the income payroll tax system that's so easy to evade? Well, we all know why the ruling class and their minions in Congress reject all reasonable thinking and insist on keeping the income payroll tax system. Now, they know it's corrupt. They know it's ridiculously easy to evade and defraud, and they know that it's broken beyond repair. But still, they insist on keeping it because it gives them two things that they crave: money and control over people's lives. We all know that lobbying firms are paid enormous amounts of money by special interests looking to buy tax breaks, fully understanding that the rest of us have to pay for what they save in taxes with those purchased breaks. Now, as we've noted in previous chairman's reports, lobbyists in turn pass this money on to members of Congress who are perpetually engaged in raising money for their campaign war chests. This corrupt system has become so entrenched that the people taking the money aren't even the least bit embarrassed by it. For them, it's just business as usual, and they don't even try to hide it from the public. Now, besides raising money from those who can afford to pay them, the ruling class uses the tax system to exert as much control over the rest of us as they can. Now, this is less overt than their money-making scheme, but it's just as real. In the process of running our daily lives, people enter into all kinds of different contracts, and the rules governing those contracts are usually quite clear. When you finance a car, for example, you know how much your monthly payment's going to be, and you know how many payments you have to make in order to pay off the loan. You also know that when you make your last payment, the car is yours, and a home mortgage works the same way. However, the rules of contracts and keeping agreements don't apply to most of the income payroll tax laws. The smart people in D.C. have become so arrogant that they openly boast that they can do anything they want, anytime they want. Now, many people believe that they have earned their Social Security benefits and that their right to those benefits can't be taken away. Unfortunately, that's not true. Fleming v. Nestor is a 1960 Supreme Court case. Ephraim Nestor was an immigrant from Bulgaria. He had paid into Social Security for 19 years, but his benefits were cut off when he was deported for involvement in the Communist Party. He sued, claiming that the government could not nullify his entitlement to those benefits. The case eventually reached the Supreme Court, where the court ruled that there is no contractual right to receive Social Security benefits. Now, because there is no contractual obligation to provide Social Security benefits to anyone, here's what these smart people tell us they can do if we don't obey. If you're retired and receiving Social Security benefits, but also have other income from savings or other retirement accounts, they can decide to reduce your Social Security benefits by the amount of the other income. Or they can create a means test under which people whose incomes are declared to be too high are ineligible to receive benefits at all, even though they may have paid into the system for decades. The smart people in D.C. boast that they can change any part of the income payroll tax rules at any time and even make the changes retroactive. Now, this seems quite unfair to the rest of us. Now, people who study our Constitution point out that ex post facto laws are prohibited in the Constitution. Now, an ex post facto law is a law that retroactively makes an act illegal when it was legal at the time it was committed. It increases the penalties for an infraction after it's been committed, or changes the rules of evidence to make conviction easier. Ex post facto laws are expressly forbidden by the United States Constitution in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 3 with respect to federal laws, and Article 1, Section 10 with respect to state laws. However, in United States v. Carlton, the Supreme Court held that the ex post facto law does not apply to income payroll tax changes. The court ruled, quoting, "The 1987 amendment's retroactive application to Carlton's 1986 transactions does not violate due process. Under the applicable standard, a tax statute's retroactive application must be supported by a legitimate legislative purpose furthered by rational means, end of quote. So here are some examples of what can be done. If you bought a house but depend on the mortgage interest deduction to make your payments, you may lose that house if that deduction is suddenly taken away. They can decide that the earnings on a Roth IRA, which are currently not taxable, are retroactively taxable. Now, this could substantially reduce the amount you have available for retirement. You could buy some equipment for your business in December of 2020, and at that time you're entitled to a 100% deduction. However, in June of 2021, they can change that law to disallow the deduction. In conclusion, the ruling class and their minions in D.C. have gotten away with bullying us for way too long. Now, they have no incentive to ensure that we all prosper. All that matters to them is that they and their friends prosper at our expense. Now, isn't it time we demand that the smart people in D.C. start doing things that benefit us? Maybe it's time that we deal with these bullies by demanding that they do their jobs and put us, not themselves, first. It's time we set out some conditions for them if they want to retain their positions. Now, this story about a father and his teenage son is quite instructive. The son wants his dad to get a car for him, and the father lays out the conditions. Son, you bring your grades up from a C to a B average, study your Bible, and get your hair cut, and then we'll talk about getting you a car. The boy thought about it for a moment and then agreed to his father's terms. After about 6 weeks, his father said, Son, you've brought your grades up, and I've observed that you have been studying your Bible, but I'm disappointed you have not gotten your hair cut. The boy said, Well, you know, Dad, I've been thinking about that, and I've noticed in my studies of the Bible that Samson had long hair, John the Baptist had long hair, Moses had long hair, and there's even strong evidence that Jesus himself had long hair. To which his dad replied, Well, son, did you also notice that all of those people walked everywhere they went? It's time that we the people laid down some conditions for the smart people in D.C. Now, if they want to stay in power, they don't have to cut their hair, but they do need to put a stake in the heart of the income payroll tax system and enact the FAIRtax. Anything less is unacceptable. If we allow the ruling class and their minions to keep leading us down the path we're currently on, the result is going to be an unmitigated disaster for us, our children, and our grandchildren. It's time that Americans take control of our country by eliminating the income payroll tax system. No more games that profit only the ruling class and their D.C. minions. Enact the FAIRtax now. If you have friends who don't know about the FAIRtax, send them to FAIRtax.org. Have them watch the whiteboards under how it works, and if they agree, ask them to please join us. Then, contact your members of Congress and the President and demand that Congress pass the FAIRtax, the only truly fair tax.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at FAIRtax.org.